So
I'm here.
folks, we're live. We're not professionals, and this is.
Can you hear me?
Yes, okay. Now we can. Thanks, Paige.
Okay, so we'll go without video. That's all right. So first of all, thank you everyone for being here. I'm having a blast. I'm sure everybody else is too. Good afternoon. I first met Jane in her color theory class, and she was the first person to ever teach me how to really bend color to my will. I then went on and joined her creative strength training community, and I learned that Jane doesn't just talk the talk. Jane really walks the walk of creative community. She's an international instructor and lecturer. She's an accomplished surface designer and quilter. Jane has either organized or been the featured artist in shows at the Texas Quilt Museum, the National Quilt Museum, and at the McNay in San Antonio. Her awards include Best in Show at the Tubac Arts Center, the Quilt Japan Prize, and the Gold Prize at the International Textile Exhibition in Korea. She's a former president of the International Surface Design Association, and in 2019, Jane was named Artist of the Year by the San Antonio Art Students League. It's our great pleasure as MAFA to welcome you to Living in Creative Community with Jane Dunawald.
Thank you, Paige. I am absolutely delighted to be here, and as far as the comments on the technological stuff that keeps happening, I'm getting my screen ready here. All I can really say to you is that even the best laid plans and even the most competent experts can be undone by technology. And anyone who was in a class with me yesterday knows that sometimes the internet shuts off unexpectedly, and then we get a backup plan. And then I woke up this morning with a second backup plan. Didn't used to think I was a control freak, but I guess my ways are saying otherwise. In any event, I'm really glad to be here with you and to share these thoughts. And I want to start by saying that I don't know what 2020 was like specifically for you, but especially, and I will preface this by saying that one of my students said one time that if I didn't cry at least once in the class, people didn't get their money's worth. And it is true that I have a reputation for being very heartfelt and connected to what I do and to the blessings that it has rained down on me. But I'm also feeling very sensitive to the fact that many people suffered loss last year. And I want to say up front that if you lost someone to the pandemic, all of us who are here together grieve with you and are very sorry. And I think we have to acknowledge other kinds of losses that happened last year, because it wasn't only that sort of really terrible thing. It was also that schools were upended and businesses closed. And there was a fair amount, I know this from connecting with people so frequently as I do online, that there was a fair amount of depression and anxiety, and there was a lot of discord, and there was a lot of distancing. And that just came with the territory. And I think those challenges are part of every single year. That's not something that just happens randomly or occasionally. That's just part of being human and being alive. But I think it was underscored because we also felt so fragile and everything seemed so difficult because it was magnified through the pandemic lens. So here comes 2021, and everyone is really hoping that this is going to bring relief. And now we're almost 7 months into the new year and thinking about creative re-entry and new sort of leases on our creative lives. And so what I want to talk about is partly personal reflection on that, because as I considered my own changed life, I was reminded of this haiku from Masahide. Since my house burned down, I now own a better view of the rising moon. The house has burned down. We have an unencumbered view of the sky, and the moon will rise with us or without us. So what now? we all accept, we're on the same wavelength here. I so resonated with the comments that were made at the beginning of this particular session, because COVID did throw a wrench in the works and we all hit the pause button. But now, you know, the statistics are showing that the national parks are filling up again and the events and the attractions are booked solid, and people are craving new vistas and they're loving being outdoors again. And activity is great. You yourselves have probably spent a fair amount of time being outdoors and relishing what feels like such a fresh start in so many ways. But here's my hope. What I hope is that as we think about what we're going to do next and we re-enter, that we don't just jump back in as if COVID hit a pause button and we all went into suspended animation. I'm not sure we should just pick up where we left off. I think there's some other considerations before we jump back in with both feet. Because along with the resurgence of interest in all things I think of as other, and that is all of the things that are not me, that are around me, I'm hoping that we have a resurgence of reverence. I think being stuck inside and then busting out and we're not stuck inside anymore would be great. It is great, but I think along with that, it's important that we cultivate a renewed appreciation of the choices that we make and the opportunities that we have and the ways that we use our time. And I think about this a little bit like an elimination diet. You know, people who go on elimination diets take a lot of foods literally off the plate, and then they gradually reintroduce them in an effort to figure out what's going on with their systems so they can perform optimally physically. And so if we think about it like that, the goal of an elimination diet is to keep your eating aligned with what suits your system. So I want to be equally thoughtful when it comes to knowing how to engage with the world again. I've had a year to think about what's important to me, and you've had a year to think about what is important to you. And I want to return to some of the things that I miss dearly. But frankly, there are some other things that I would be perfectly happy to let go. And here's the thing, every decision I make, I'm really trying to make it with reverence. I'm trying to make it with reverence for myself and for the people that I know and interact with. And I'm trying to make it from a position of reverence for the earth that we walk on. But it's hard to know exactly how to make decisions with reverence. What does reverence even mean? And personally, rather than guess that I know what a word means, I'm old enough now, and I have the benefit of the internet. I can look words up. So I do that a lot in order to figure out what the real meaning is or what the base meaning of a word is, because we have different interpretations. And what reverence means is a deep regard or a deep respect. And so with that in mind, I have some considerations I'd like to share with you so that you can think about what making decisions with reverence looks like on your end. And in order to kick that whole conversation off, I'd like to talk about what I have characterized as the cornerstones of creativity. I teach creativity a lot now. I always have. Just about anyone who teaches process classes also has some element of interest in creativity. But I've been working with this for more than 20 years. And a few years ago, it dawned on me that we have these supports. That's what they are, just like there are 4 legs on a table. And so the 4 cornerstones of creativity for me are curiosity, clarity, confidence, and community. But I'm going to talk about each one individually so we can tease them apart and see how each one can serve us as we think about re-entering into our new creative lives. So we're going to start with curiosity, and what I would like for you to do is think about this for a few seconds. Would you say that you feel curious about the world around you on a regular basis? Or are you noticing that maybe your curiosity has been hijacked? Because I think that happened last year. A lot of people were stuck and they just kept saying they couldn't work. And I think part of the reason they couldn't work is obviously it was so disruptive, but I think it's also because some of the ways that we ordinarily engage with curiosity weren't happening because so much was shut down. And then we had to retreat, or we were, not that we had to, but in many instances, that was just rock and roll. We did retreat. Because take, for example, workshops, we were supposed to be doing this last year, if I remember correctly. But workshops and critique groups, all of that went away. And then our curiosity meters weren't being engaged in quite the same way. So when those opportunities dried up, the question is, did your curiosity dry up along with them? Now, I know for a lot of people that wasn't true, but for many of us, we have to acknowledge that there was some element of that happening. And having a curiosity deficit is like having a vitamin deficiency. You don't always notice there's something wrong right away. I wasn't feeling really high energy. I thought it was partly depression, but I went for my yearly checkup. They ran some blood tests and realized that I had an iron deficiency and that I needed a little boost of vitamin B12. So that could be solved with supplements, and I feel great. But how do you know when you have a curiosity deficiency? It isn't perhaps as easily diagnosed, and it is an issue of self-diagnosis, because it's up to you to think about when is the last time you were challenged by something related to what you do, and many of you are weavers. I know some of you are AC/DC and do some surface design too, but when's the last time you thought about trying something new in the studio that you had never considered before? Or when's the last time you looked up a process or a material online? And more importantly, when is the last time that you can remember when you were so excited by some idea that popped into your head that you could hardly try it, but you could feel that thump, thump, thump? That's an indication that you're really onto something. It's such a great feeling. It's very exciting. It's one of the gifts that we get, those creative kicks that we get. So the question is whether the pandemic, the fear and unknowing of it, ground down your curiosity in the same way that it downed a lot of airliners. And now, does your curiosity need new wings? Because that's really the route back, is to rediscover a sense of wonder and questioning. And there are a few ways that you can do that intentionally. Most of the time, we can't just wait for inspiration to strike. It works better if we go looking for it. And the way to go looking for it might be to make a short list of things that you have thought you would like to try and that you've never done before. And if you come up dry with that one, then you have permission to go online and look around and jump into Pinterest. We know all of that is a black hole. That's why you need to set the timer. So it isn't a black hole. And if you think to yourself, well, I don't have time to play around like that, I have news for you. That's how children learn. They play around. And you have an inner child who deserves to play around and figure out some things from that perspective and experience the joy of doing it. But if you're having trouble casting that as play, then I'm going to suggest that you shift how you think about it a little bit and instead cast it as research. Because that's really what play is. That's the purpose it serves for children. We don't say, oh, those kids outside playing in the woods or playing in the sandbox or playing in the dollhouse. We don't think of them as doing research. But a matter of fact, that's pretty much what it is. And we never outgrow that beautiful combination of being able to both play and research simultaneously in an effort to ignite our curiosity. You could ask other people what they're curious about. You could ask them what they're reading and what they're watching. A lot of the time when you ask other people what they like, you get the hit you need because you don't want to do what they're doing. And that helps redirect you back toward what you would like to do, what appeals to you. Another one that works out really well is to use your phone and start a visual journal of some kind. I have a friend in San Antonio who lives along the San Antonio River and is fortunate enough to be able to walk down to a fairly wild part of that river south of the downtown. And every day during the pandemic for over a year. She took a picture of the same spot, but at different times of day in order to witness to the different periods of light, which is a lot like what Manet did when he painted the haystacks. He painted them over and over and over again because he wanted to know what they looked like early in the morning and in the late afternoon and at dusk. And when I looked at these photographs my friend had taken, and she was lackadaisical, a little bit not knowing what she could possibly do with them and discounting them, that's the word I'm looking for. All I could think is that if they were all framed up and hung in an exhibition somewhere in a gallery, what a beautiful, quiet meditation that show would be. And it would reflect her experience of being quietly engaged with the world around her while all hell was breaking loose. Which leads me to encouraging you to also think about what I call sacred creativity. As I said, I've studied creativity for a long time. I was a psychology major, for whatever that's worth. I took a class on creativity in college as a psychology option. But here's what I know for sure. We all have a birthright of creativity. We think we don't. Some people say that they're not creative. And I say, you just haven't discovered how you're creative yet, or you haven't given yourself a chance, or that got squelched out of you somewhere along the way. But I know everyone has an ability to be creative. And okay, sure, some people are way more creative than others, but we all have it in us if we would only start thinking of it as one more of our senses to be used to engage with the world. And the other thing that I know for sure is that if you think that your creativity should be pigeonholed and you think, well, yeah, in the studio, I'm creative, or in the kitchen, I'm creative, or in the garden, I'm creative. Well, you're not giving yourself a chance, because the thing about creativity is that it's like any other well-oiled piece of equipment. It's why I talk about cross-training, because the more you use creativity, the more creativity you have to use. And I want you to consider that there are two distinct forms of creative, what I think of as creative action. So we've got the sacred creativity, but we've also got what I think of as commercial creativity. And that's the part of the creative process, or the goal of that particular kind of creativity is inventions and discoveries. And it could be that you create woven garments with the purpose of selling them, or scarves. Or I have a friend who paints landscapes, and she's not painting landscapes only because she loves landscapes. She is painting landscapes to sell. And there's nothing wrong with commercial creativity in that respect. Without it, we wouldn't have all of the advances, including all the technological advances that we can take advantage of. And so all of this exists on a continuum, and we've got the commercial creativity over here, and then down back over on this end, we've got the sacred creativity, and that is not about doing something with the purpose of selling it or even sharing it. That is for the purpose of the enjoyment, the joy that comes from actually creating. And maybe you haven't experienced that kind of creativity in quite some time. So maybe it's time to start thinking about that. Just something that you do because you love doing it. You love doing it just for the joy of making it. And some of us work both ends of that continuum, and that's all great too, because here's the thing, it's all fine. But as you think about re-entering the post-pandemic world, consider where sacred creativity fits into your life, because if it has not been part of your life, then maybe engaging with it again would lead you down a path you haven't traveled in a very long time. Now, while you're ramping up your curiosity quotient, I want you to watch out for the saboteur, because the saboteur is an inherent and unavoidable part of creative life. As a matter of fact, as far as I can tell, it's part of being human. Sabotaging ourselves is part of being human. Recognizing when other people are attempting to sabotage us is part of being human. It's not only about being creative, it's the inner critic. And the inner critic is probably the worst. But I also think of another version of the saboteur, and my version of that is the committee. I don't just have an inner critic. Oh no, I've got a whole committee of critics. And the thing about the committee that I want you to recognize is that here's when you know it's engaging. When you're doing something creative and you start thinking, I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm not really very good at this. Who do I think I am? When you're thinking thoughts like that about your work or doubting yourself, you are sabotaging yourself, but you're also working with the committee or letting it do a number on you for that matter. And the committee is made up of people, just so we realize and we get this square. It's either people who have been dismissive in the past, and we would be telling the truth if we acted as though we haven't all experienced that. Well-meaning friends, judgmental parents or siblings, can even be a spouse or a partner. Sometimes they don't know they're doing it, and sometimes they do know they're doing it. So we have that component of the committee, but we also have the people we put on the committee because we want them to like our work in this creative realm, because if they like our work, by extension, they like us. I had 3 major surface designers on my own committee, and not one of them had ever said or done anything to me that was the least bit amiss. They were there, I pictured them when things weren't going well in the studio because I wanted them to like my work. I wanted them to jury me into shows. I wanted them to like me if they knew me. All of this is basically just a version of sabotage. So we want to learn to recognize sabotage for what it is so that we can work with it. And this brings me to the point of talking about paradoxes. Let's define paradox. Those are opposites that seem as though they can't coexist, but they do. And there are a lot of them. There's always a downside and there's usually an upside, and they're inextricably woven together. And the saboteur is an example of a paradox, because sabotage is a really terrible thing. Obviously, when we self-sabotage, that's terrible. It's no fun when other people sabotage us either, when we don't see it coming. But there's a gift to this. And that is that when we see the sabotage coming, either because we recognize what our own thought patterns turn into, or we know for a fact that when we have lunch with so-and-so, what we can expect, then we're prepared to deal better with it. And then it can't take you down. So then you're learning to pay attention to these situations in order to honor yourself and head them off at the pass. There's a good reason the saboteur is often referred to as the guardian of choice. And that's because that's exactly what the saboteur allows you to do. When you're witnessing to what you do to yourself and you witness to what other people could do to you if you allowed it, then you're making a choice about how that's going to unfold. And that means you're flipping the saboteur, and that's a really great thing because then it lightens your load. You don't have to carry something around that you haven't figured out yet and that you didn't realize you were even carrying. And when you're not stuck in all of that anymore and you lighten that load, guess what happens then? You've got some spaciousness around not only how you think, but also the work that you're creating. And now your curiosity has space and time to come back. You're not stuck inside yourself anymore, small and cramped. You're outside and you can marvel at things and you can be curious again. So I think of this as a mantra that it helps me remember. And sometimes I have to ask myself, stop, Jane, what am I missing? What haven't I noticed? Because that's another paradox. You think, well, Jane, how can I notice something I haven't noticed? But that helps us to learn to pay attention. And as an example, one year I missed spring. That sounds crazy, but I was really busy. I was distracted. I was traveling a lot. I was teaching a whole lot. I think I was working on a new book. And I never stopped to notice those beautiful chartreusey green baby leaves that are the first ones that come out. I know you know what I'm talking about. By the time I got my blinders off, the leaves were dark green, and it's not that they weren't beautiful, they're nature, it's all beautiful, but they weren't that beautiful pale green that I had missed. And so when I got my next yearly calendar, I turned to April and I wrote at the top of the April page, notice spring. And then I went back to the beginning of January. And when I got to April and I flipped open the calendar to that month, it was a little reminder that I should be looking around for spring. Because frankly, what if it was my last spring? That would be a terrible thing to miss. So it's really important that we resolve to notice something delightful every single day and be curious. And now I'm going to send this dog away before I continue. She's making a lot of noise. Pardon me. The issue of lecturing from a home studio instead of in a huge hall where the dog would have been relegated to the kitchen. Pardon me. But that was a good place to break because we want to move on to the second cornerstone of creativity. Now that our curiosity quotient has been met and it's healthy and it's functioning again, the second cornerstone comes into focus because it literally is about focus. And the second cornerstone is clarity. Absolutely the best thing that can happen when we've engaged with criticism and we've thought about the committee and we've thought about the critic and we've recognized where the saboteur engages is that we can get really clear about that. And that's the thing. It allows you to focus. Developing clarity intentionally gives us a better sense of everything, but it also points out that what we thought that was negative that started inside us didn't really start inside us. It infiltrated us. It came from somewhere else. And when you get clear about that and where it happened and who was involved, then you realize this isn't really about you. And that leads to a really important understanding to cultivate. And it's this, that we can't help it as human beings, but to interpret everything in a way that makes it feel very personal to us. There's a phrase, it's all about me. We've all heard it. And that is probably really referencing the extreme narcissistic version of everything being personal. But you don't have to be a narcissist to recognize that most of what happens to you is being filtered through your experience of it feeling really personal. And when we take things really personally, we take on a lot of emotion and reaction to things that we could have just let slide. And that involves choosing to see things from an impersonal perspective so that we can give things a little distance. And that is another way that we raise our self-esteem and avoid sabotage and take care of our creative selves. And here's an example from a student of mine. This particular student happens to be a weaver, which is just random and lucky because you can relate. And she felt she was on a really great personal path. She had been working a long time. She knew what she knew what she was doing. And she had learned some surface design from me. She was really developing her own personal style. And she went to a workshop thinking that she was going to pick up some additional techniques in addition to it being, you know, there's always an element of critique in workshop settings. But during the course of the week, the instructor pulled her aside and told her that she needed to rethink her work because it wasn't abstract. And that if it wasn't abstract, it wasn't really art. And this was so crushing to this particular student that she left the workshop at the end of the week and went home, and she didn't work for over a year, which I find reprehensible. At the end of that year, as she was really still struggling with this and wanting to get back to her work, but frozen by those comments, she finally went and talked to another instructor that she trusted and talked about this particular incident that had happened. And as they talked about it, she saw that this was not about her, that the instructor had approached her in a way that was unkind, it was unfair. In my personal opinion, when I heard this story, I felt it was a version of bullying. And that happens. People think instructors walk on water. And yeah, okay, we do. But we don't. We're human. And sometimes some instructors can be mean. And sometimes things can come out of an instructor's mouth that hurts and feels as though it was mean. And maybe the instructor didn't really mean it either. But the point is, that when this student who has become my friend saw this all for what it was, she realized that what happened wasn't personal. She could look at it through the impersonal lens of seeing that it was about that instructor and it wasn't really about her, and that her work was her work and she loved her work. And she loved the way her work was unfolding. And therefore she could get back to work. And that means that what she was doing is what I call putting on your armor. When we see these things that can happen for what they are, and when we know by developing a strategy how we're going to handle the stuff that can happen that we weren't expecting, and we can keep it at an impersonal distance before we react and cave, then it's likely that we will feel much freer about being able to create in an unencumbered way. And clarity is also a valuable tool when it comes to thinking about this pandemic year, because it's up to you to think about what you want to get back to and why, what you're going to embrace again, and what you're willing to lose or dismiss. As I said at the beginning, there are some things I'm not going to do again now that I've had distance from them and I can look at them less personally. And when you have those realizations and the clarity that's attached to them, then really what you're encountering is the silver lining for a big, dark, ugly cloud. And that's the path that can lead you to embracing who you really are and what you really love to do. And more importantly, being okay with it. I found this passage from the Tao Te Ching, and I want to share it with you because I think it's so relevant for where we are when we're talking about clarity. And this is from the Stephen Mitchell translation. The ancient masters were profound and subtle. Their wisdom was unfathomable. There is no way to describe it. All we can describe is their appearance. They were careful as someone crossing an iced over stream. They were alert as a warrior in enemy territory. They were courteous as a guest, fluid as melting ice, shapeable as a block of wood, receptive as a valley, clear as a glass of water. Do you have the patience to wait till your mud settles and the water is clear? Can you remain unmoving till the right action arises by itself? And I want to think about that last phrase as it relates to the actual work that we do. And this may or may not be as appropriate for weaving. I thought about it when I included this, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway because I think it's a valid consideration. I know in the kinds of works that I teach, surface design and printing, embroidery and stitching, etc., a lot of the time we have this tendency to just default to the first thing that we think of doing when we're stuck, just in order to be able to do something. It's difficult to sit with our work and think about what is the next step in the process. What can I add? What will move this forward in the most elegant possible way? And yet, that's such an important ability to cultivate. And when you're doing that, then you're waiting till the mud settles and the water is clear. And you're not moving until the right action arises by itself and you know what to do next in that particular piece or in that particular process. So keep that sort of clarity in mind too, because cultivating that is as worthwhile as anything else that I've mentioned up to this point. Confidence is the third cornerstone of creativity. When you choose to be actively curious, and then you're getting really clear about what your preferences are, and let's be clear about that. Your preferences are what you like to do and the materials that you like to use. But you can also think about the other things that matter to you as they relate to whatever it is you're making. And this is all encompassing. So for example, you might really care about whether all the seams are straight if you're sewing a garment together. You might really care about whether the selvage is consistent and nice and tight. You might care about whether you can mix the color that you see in your mind's eye. And we spent a whole day yesterday talking about color. And the point of learning color mixing is that then you can match whatever you're imagining, which is a great skill to acquire. But there are other kinds of things that can be important to your process. You could care about where your materials are sourced, and you could care about whether your natural dyes are sustainable. And you could care about whether the workers who carve the stamps that you use in your work are fairly paid. And we haven't even scratched the surface yet of the other kinds of things that we care about, which are contributing to the message that our work imbues. And from that standpoint, you can think about yourself. Do you just care about, are you all about color? Are you passionate about pattern? Do you long to make work that expresses how you feel about global warming or some other social justice issue? Fill in the blank. Because what you care about isn't predictable. And no one can dictate your passion to you. But it's so important that you get in touch with what it is, because then you are connecting to your creative self. And when you connect to your creative self, then you are building self-confidence. Because you know what happens then? You don't care anymore what other people think about your work. You're the only one who can decide whether this is how you're going to work, and then you can be satisfied with how you work. And you can also then come face to face with what you think your shortcomings are. And if you think you have shortcomings, then you're in a position to decide whether you want to do anything about it or not. Because if you can live with the imperfections, then no one else has a right to judge. But if you can't live with the imperfections, then you owe it to yourself to do something about it, because that also builds your confidence. And as long as we're talking about imperfection, I just want to touch on perfection, because I think perfection is overrated. The great Buddhist American teacher Pema Chodron referred to perfection as a form of death. And that's because once you've achieved perfection, sometimes it completely shuts you down, because then does everything that happened after that need to be perfect too? Do you do nothing for fear that you won't make it perfect? Because if you're doing that, you're sabotaging yourself in the cruelest of ways. Because I think you'll agree with me, it's the practice of working. It's trying something, maybe it doesn't work, you see how to get it better, you stay the course with it. It's about showing up. That's where the satisfaction comes from. It's from being present, because whatever you've made will eventually disappear. But the experience you had of making it fills up your soul and contributes to your sense of confidence. And part of that is avoiding comparing yourself to others, because comparison is the thief of joy. So keep that in mind. And then also remember that what Suzuki Roshi, a Zen master, reminded his students was also true. You are perfect exactly the way you are, and you need a little improvement. And that's true of all of us. But when you choose to live with imperfection, and you even go so far as embracing the wabi-sabi beauty of it, then you settle into a place where you're quietly confident. And we all have recognized people who exhibit this quiet confidence. And I think it's appealing, because what that means is that they and we are also walking in integrity. And that's a very profound thing to seek. And it reminded me of this poem from Naomi Shihab Nye. When they say, "Don't I know you?" say no. When they invite you to the party, remember what parties are like before answering. Somebody in a loud voice telling you they once wrote a poem and greasy sausage balls on a paper plate. Then reply. If they say we should get together, say why. It's not that you don't love them anymore. You're trying to remember something too important to forget. Trees and the monastery bell at twilight. Tell them you have a new project and it will never be finished. When someone recognizes you in a grocery store, nod briefly and become a cabbage. When someone you haven't seen in 10 years appears at the door, don't start singing him all your new songs because you will never catch up. Walk around feeling like a leaf. Know that you could tumble any second, and then decide what to do with your time. Now, that's not a poem, and I am certainly not suggesting that you turn your back on people that you love or your friends, or in fact, that you disengage in any way with the world. That's not what this poem is saying. This poem is a reminder that time is limited and we have choices. And we could tumble any second, and we want to use that time wisely. Which brings us to the fourth cornerstone of creativity, and that is community. And this is being in relationship with other people, other makers and artists. It's why we're here at part of MAFA. And when we're part of the right community, then we thrive. But community doesn't just happen. I could take 20 people or 200 people and throw them together with common circumstance. And it doesn't necessarily mean there will be any sense of community at all. Sometimes we're part of a group and we can hardly wait to get out of the group because there's so little sense of community. So in thinking about that, I realized that there are 5 qualities that I've identified as being important to any community that I am part of. And I want to share those in the hopes that it will help you think about what's important when you're looking for community. I think respect is important. That's number 1. Acceptance despite differences. Integrity among members, which means a willingness to be honest in order to build trust. I think it's important to find compassionate and kind behavior toward other members of the group, exhibiting that and receiving it. And I think there should be a willingness to be supportive even when the preferences and the approaches vary widely. And I would say in any group that has a common shared interest, like this group, the approaches and preferences are all over the map. And that diversity is something that we're seeking. It can feed us, but we have to be willing to support it, which means we're not going to judge. And there's a challenge that is related to building community, like I'm talking about right now, because when we choose to intentionally engage with other people, whether it's a handful of people or it's a larger group, which could be a guild or could be a church community or fellowship, it could be in a classroom, it could be a critique group, the level of support and integrity deepens among the participants or the members when we choose to be vulnerable with each other. Now, I'm not suggesting that that happens overnight or that it's always a good idea, but I think it can be a goal, and I think it's important. And I want to point out that there are 2 sides to this, just as there are to most of the things that I've already been talking about today. Because on one hand, when we choose to be vulnerable, we also have to have a clear sense of boundaries, our own personal boundaries, and also the boundaries that we respect for others. And it takes time to establish that combination. That doesn't just happen overnight. I've watched my mastery program groups come together. They meet 6 times over 2 years, 2.5 years. The first week, no one's really willing to be very vulnerable. Everybody's sort of on edge, to tell you the truth. But as we meet with each other and we choose to share what we're working on and what our successes and what our failures were, we also work ourselves into a situation where it's easier to be vulnerable. And when we are, then we discover that many of the things that are concerns for us are concerns for everybody else too. And when we can establish that combination where we're vulnerable, but we're also respecting other people's boundaries, then we're creating a safe environment where there can be all kinds of healthy interchanges and interactions. And that's a really wonderful place to be because, and this again is what I've noticed in the groups that I've worked with and how I feel myself. It's a profoundly moving experience to be in this kind of community, because when you are, you feel as though you have come home. Now, if that description of community sounds great, but you're not really sure you've got it, don't fret about it, because there's always still time, and you could start building it for yourself. You could start small. You could think of 2 or 3 other people that you like and that you trust, and you could reach out to them and suggest that you come up with a shared set of values that could guide a brand new critique group or a sharing group that wouldn't necessarily even be about critique. And you know, a lot of us are introverts, creatives frequently are introverts. So if the idea of reaching out to other people makes you feel a little awkward, you don't have to call them up on the phone. You could compose an email or a note that you could send in the mail. And you could do it that way where you can shape what's being said and not feel quite as exposed and vulnerable right from the very beginning. But no matter how the conversation begins, it's one worth starting, and I hope you will consider it. So those are my cornerstones: curiosity, clarity, confidence, and community. And this is what I would like you to consider as you engage with your life after the pandemic. Because what I wish for you is curiosity, so that your grasp on the creative world can expand. And what I wish for you is clarity, so that you can settle into being the fascinatingly creative person that you already are, and you can live comfortably there. And I wish for you a quiet confidence and the joy that comes from dropping the comparisons and living in the present time of being enough and having enough. And of course, I wish for you, all of us, community, a like-minded group of others sharing ideas and championing goals, ever aware of the priceless gift that you are to each other because you have chosen to be here in a common purpose. I thought of this excerpt from a Maya Angelou poem, and I'd like to close with her words. Lying, thinking last night, how to find my soul a home, where water is not thirsty and bread loaf is not stone. I came up with one thing, and I don't believe I'm wrong, that nobody but nobody can make it out here alone. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today with you. And I hope that now we can continue with some questions and some discussion, Margaret.
Jane, that was very moving. And I just want to tell you how much I appreciate that. Just the fact that we're here having a virtual conference was one way that we could try to keep our community going when we were faced with the prospect of not being able to meet in person. And what you said was time is limited and we have choices. So I just want to say to everybody who's watching, I really appreciate that you've chosen to be with us at the conference. And Jane, I'm really grateful that you've chosen to be with us to speak today and to teach.
Thank
It-
you.
Anybody who has comments and questions for Jane, we don't have much in the Q&A right now, but again, if you look over there, you'll see a Q&A button, and we have a little more time. If anybody has comments and questions, then we'd be happy to entertain them. There was one note Donna said when you were talking about clarity. She said, I find often that clarity when I'm stuck comes from just the doing, and then it unfolds in front of me.
Mhm, mhm.
So
I
I
think,
think maybe not to be paralyzed by a lack of clarity.
oh, sure.
Mm.
Another paradox. The clarity comes from doing. And, I talked about this yesterday in my color class, but it's true of everything. There are some things we can't think our way out of. We just have to get busy and show up and do things. And I think so much about the creative process is exactly what she said, that we can think that we're stumped, but the clarity comes from actually engaging and physically doing the work instead of just trying to figure it all out in advance, which has never really worked very well for me.
You're getting a standing ovation in the Q&A.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Someone else is asking, what was the name of the poet quoted earlier? Naomi, someone, please and thank you.
Yeah, no worries. As a matter of fact, it also occurred to me, and you and I can discuss this later. I have a transcript of this talk, and if you would like me to share it with you so that you could share it with the members, I would be happy to do that. Or maybe just the poetry selections, because I think they were so, I'm a big fan of writing. And that particular poet is Naomi Shihab, Shihab, Nye, Nye. And she's a major contemporary American poet. She happens to live in San Antonio, and I have known her for years. She has a number of wonderful books, and I believe is currently the Young People's Poet Laureate, or was recently. And actually during the pandemic wrote a huge online poem that other people could contribute to. And so she would definitely be someone who would be worth checking out and possibly reading more. Her poetry is sensitive. Her father is Palestinian and her mother is American. So she straddles two worlds in a very interesting way.
Jane, we would love to have a transcript, or even if it's just the poetry citations, that would be great. So for everybody who's watching, first off, this is being recorded. Shortly after we end, you should see a replay button come up, and any handouts that Jane sends me, we'll add those a little bit later. And where you would find those is look all the way down at the bottom of the page. When we have those up, you'll see a downloadable link at the bottom.
Great.
Our next question is, Jane, can you recommend some books on creative communities, or do you have a book that I can buy?
Well, I wrote a book in 2016 called Creative Strength Training. And Creative Strength Training wasn't originally designed to be a community exactly, as much as it was written to help people face down some of the crazy crap that keeps us from working sometimes. And I think it's so, here's what I think is so important about the creative opportunities that we have. Everybody has a right to be distinctive. Everybody has a right to try and fail. Everybody has a right to try any materials they want to try, and to be a dilettante and explore and play with lots of things. And then there are ways that we can focus and we can get more serious and we can take our work to a deeper meaning, or a deeper level of meaning. Because I think about creativity also as a three-legged stool. One leg is the materials that you use, and one leg is the techniques that you use, and the third leg is your passion. And without that third leg, the stool will fall over, it won't be stable. And that's why it's so important to figure out whether you're about color, like I said, or whether you're all about pattern, or whether you're all about the garment construction, or whether you want to use your work to comment on social justice. And Creative Strength Training was written partly to help people focus better on how to unravel those parts of who they are and claim them. And so that particular book has now led to an online community that I facilitate, and it's literally called the Creative Strength Training Community. And if anybody's interested in that, I'm not really big on self-promotion. One time I was at an exhibition and somebody indicated they liked a piece of my work and they wanted a card so they could contact me later. And I opened my wallet and I had 5 cards from my Saturn dealer and no cards for myself. So I've been trying to work on that aspect of being able to be in touch with people. But if you go to my website, there are all kinds of tutorials, and I have a YouTube channel with all kinds of free tutorials, and the Creative Strength Training community information is there in case it sounds like something that somebody here might think of being part of. It's a very satisfying thing. As for other books about community specifically, I don't have anything I can recommend. Of course, there are books on creativity that are fantastic. Elizabeth, somebody will know her last name. Big Magic, I'm spacing on her last name, wrote Eat, Pray, Love. In any event, somebody will pick up on that clue.
Gilbert.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. There are some good books on creativity, but I don't know how many of them are really specifically related to the kind of field that we're in. And I don't know, that's made me think that I want to research and see what there is out there on community, because then next time I'll be able to answer that question a little bit better.
All right, we've got some great comments in here. Some of these are questions, some of them are just comments. Thanks for putting into words much of what I've been thinking about during the past year. I am particularly struck about the idea of the inner critic. I just want to say this was so beautiful, and I'm so grateful you spoke on creativity. I have felt the pain of not feeling creative for the last year. I'm only starting to pull out of it, and this was such perfect timing. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for, I can read. Thank you so much for a very thought-provoking talk. In many, many spots, you hit the nail on the head for me. For a while, I had been stuck. However, this year gave me the time to sort things out, and now I'm back to me. Thank you again. I too cried.
Yeah, I think tears are just one of those things that we can acknowledge, and it goes along with being vulnerable. I used to feel so embarrassed because I invariably cried. I've always been the crier. I mean, I used to cry watching Lassie, and my mother wouldn't let me watch the show anymore. So it isn't as though this is something that's going to go away at the age of 68 years old. And some of this stuff, we just have to roll with it and be comfortable with it and figure what the heck, if somebody else doesn't like it. It's just like when somebody doesn't like your work, that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything at all. It just means they don't like your work. It's not going to influence or change anything that you yourself are going to do. And so these comments, I have to say, I really appreciate the comments so much, because when you are, and this is sort of a pandemic issue, I suppose, when you're working in isolation on a talk like this for months at a time, which is how long it takes, at least for me, I'm kind of slow at it. It takes a while to come together, and then whatever, you know what I'm saying. But the comments that I get from people are really important to me, because then I don't feel as though I'm speaking into a vacuum. And I think that's the downside, I suppose, of, if there is any to this whole digital thing, it's that if I was standing in front of a group, then we'd have a sense to sort of celebrate all of this together. And it would be a little different from feeling as though the screen is an inevitable part of separating us.
Well, I'm seeing the comments, so I'm not sure that our viewers are feeling very separated. We're here with you. Our next question: is there a writing practice you recommend, or visual journal practice, or a combination of both?
Wow. Gosh, now I'm thinking of so many things I wish I could share with you. I myself am not a visual journal person. And I think how you choose to work with that is a really personal decision. I have have people that I've gotten to know who've been keeping journals since they were very young and have them all. And I find that amazing and incredible, and I'm a little envious of it. I have always written myself, and I'll just throw this out there as what I think, why I think it's important. As part of creative strength training, creative strength training really means that we can ramp up our creative response to everything that's happening in the world around us by training in the same way that athletes ramp up their abilities by training. And for us, of course, it's not doing push-ups, but it's paying attention to the 4 cornerstones that I just finished talking about. And as part of that whole process, what I like to recommend is what I call cross-training. And cross-training means that I think sometimes we have so many ideas, or we're thinking about the kinds of concepts that I've thrown out for your consideration today. And as long as we're only thinking about them, we can lose them. We've all had that experience of having a great idea and we don't have time or make an effort to write it down. And then, damn it, it goes away and we can't get it back. And so I think that writing doesn't necessarily have to be the kind of cross-training writing I'm talking about, does not have to be the angst-filled stuff that we might have written as teenagers. It's more, it's a practical application that moves your visual work forward, because by writing down ideas and reflecting on your ideas in writing, you are tethering them to the earth plane. And when you're tethering them to the earth plane, then you have them in a form you can't lose. So I have lots of writing prompts that I use. As a matter of fact, I will recommend this. On my website, I sell a pack of cards that are called Creative Strength Training Prompt Cards. And half of them are actually writing prompts, and half of them are actually visual prompts. I think there are 36 in the deck. And they were designed for situations where someone wants to do something, even if they've just got 15 minutes, or they want to establish kind of a practice where they do something for 15 minutes every morning or most mornings. Don't get yourself into the trap of thinking, I'm always going to do this forever and ever. Because then as soon as you don't do it, you fall off that little wagon and you just don't get back on. So these cards could be used when you feel the need. But you could pull out a card, back to this idea of, do I have writing suggestions? You could pull out one of the writing prompts in a deck like that, and you could read the writing prompt and then you could write. And they're all designed to help you get more in touch with exactly what I've been talking about, what you care about, where you want to put your energy, and in fact, where you don't want to put your energy. And I don't really care whether you go and buy those cards or not, but that might be the kind of strategy that you could set for yourself. You could, if you were thinking about doing some writing, then you might make a list of questions that you would like to ask yourself over time and start with the list of questions and then just choose one each day. And it could have to do, if you went back through this talk, if I sent the transcript and you went back and read through that, some of the questions that you could put down might be, what am I curious about today? Or what am I curious about that I haven't explored? Or what am I not feeling clear about right now? Or when do I feel most confident in what I'm doing? And when don't I feel confident at all in what I'm doing? And so you could start with basic questions around that, and that'll probably keep you going for a month. And if you need more prompts after that, write me an email and tell me that you did it for a whole month, and I'll send you 3 new questions.
It's a deal.
Okay.
All right, we have some more comments. You have touched my soul with your beautiful words. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next comment, that was fantastic, both moving and extremely helpful. I think that particularly the part about self-sabotage and not listening to any of the critics was such a terrific reminder.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
This was a fantastic talk. It was so to the point for where we are at this time. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
You're welcome. And that leads me to think of another writing prompt, which could be, when's the last time you sabotaged yourself? And what are you going to do about it? I invited students in my creative strength training program to send me 1-minute recordings that told a story of when they sabotaged and how they overcame it. And I think I got about 15 of them total. And then my daughter, who's my editor and my tech person, put them all together, and we listened, we made it available for the group to listen to. And I'm sharing that because there is such a connection that can be made with other people by being willing to be vulnerable enough to share some sort of a brief story. And it doesn't have to be a horrible story where you just look terrible. It can just be, it could even be a funny story. But I think when we have an opportunity to share that kind of stuff, it really, it solidifies the bond that we're already feeling, because we find out how human and how alike we all are.
Well, it's that ability to drop the mask.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right, here's a question. Do you have thoughts about how to cultivate the waiting part of being intentional about choices for next steps in a work or project? I find this very hard to do without some unintentional and surprising stress.
Oh man, do I know that one? Yeah, I do. Because, I mentioned earlier that I didn't realize I was a control freak until I hit 60, but I am. And part of being a control freak in recovery means that you're always figuring out strategies. So you've always got a strategy for something. And I honor that. I don't think that's a bad, as it turns out, that's not a bad way to live at all. So here's the strategy that is related to what you're asking me. In order to avoid jumping and just doing something to a piece when you're not quite sure whether you're ready or whether it will be the right thing, I put the piece somewhere where you can see it, and resolve that you're not going to do anything until one of two things happens. A week has passed, or the right idea pops into your head and it's the right idea because, I talk a lot about third chakra, well, chakras in general, in another lecture that I give. And your third chakra is your gut instinct. That's that feeling we have, and that's why it's called a gut instinct. That's the feeling we have when we know that what we're going to do is that we've hit on the right thing. We just know it. And if you have that sort of a reaction to something that you're working on and you know what to do, then you're free to go. But until that happens, or if that's not happening, then what I recommend is that first of all, you hang the piece up, and then as you're walking past it, you look at it rather impersonally. And then in addition to that, you set aside some time, 15 minutes to 30 minutes, whatever. You sit in front of the piece with a notebook and you make what I call the elegant list. And the elegant list is it's a form of free association. You write down every single thing that you think you could do to the piece as it comes to mind. So you think, oh, I could hand paint black across the top, or I could add another blah over here in the corner, or I could weave I could weave a red thread through it with needle weaving. You think of all the things you could do. I would spackle it. It's just me. But I make a list and I don't do anything. And I keep adding to my list and adding to my list. And maybe the list grows over the whole week. So maybe I have a dedicated session with the piece where I'm making physically making the list and tethering the ideas to the earth plane. And then as I'm walking back and forth, maybe that stimulates additional ideas. So I keep adding to my list. And then at some point, which is where the week comes in, I sit down with my list and I start crossing off the things that obviously are really bad ideas. And usually by that process of populating the list and then eliminating, excuse me, some of the ideas, you resolve your issue. And sometimes there's a moment of, excuse me, clarity where you do get a hit of exactly what the right thing is to do. And that's very exciting. But sometimes you actually have to sit with, especially if it's a piece where you have a lot invested in it over a long period of time and maybe even money, then it's really better not to rush. And in a case like that, unless there's a deadline or there's some reason that you have to rush the finishing, I would just start something new. And I would I'd keep the other one up for a while and see where it headed. But 99% of the time, the process I'm describing of creating the elegant list allows you to figure out what the next best step would be. And it's called the elegant list because it leads to the elegant choice. Because there are always a lot of choices. There are a lot of choices of things I could have chosen to wear today to speak to you. And believe you me, I tried them all on, even though you're only seeing from here up. But the point is, there's the thing I will feel most secure and relaxed and elegant in. And that's kind of the equivalent of the choice that you're making with your work as you consider what the possibilities are.
All right, I've got a fun one now. It's as if Jane is giving a fireside chat in the living room.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'm not big on I could have put the Golden Gate Bridge behind me, but I wouldn't have fooled anybody. So no reason to do that.
Here's a comment. How you speak about community is how I live as part of a spiritual community. I was surprised and really felt a connection with you that is so inspirational.
Well, thank you. I started my trajectory by planning to go to divinity school. And my father was a pastor. So it has been said to me more than once, which I find kind of ironic, that it's come full circle, but in a way that I had no idea was actually going to happen when I ran screaming and running from the church. So here we are.
Well, that's the difference between spirituality and religion. They're sometimes two different things. All right, here's a tough one that we all face. How would you respond to people who say that crafters are not artists? In other words, that craft is not art?
Just like that. Laugh.
It's my favorite answer ever.
Oh, well, we got a phrase in Texas. And oh gosh, I'm not from Texas, but I have several friends who were born here. And one of them, whenever she wanted to say something ruder, she would just say, "Oh, honey, you're just a mess." So you could try that and see how far it got you. But actually, I wrote about this.
Say, bless your heart.
Oh, you could. Oh, yeah. Oh, bless your little heart. That would work. Or you could say, well, I just don't think you've thought it through yet. But because really that's what it comes down to for me. It's a narrow-mindedness that hasn't opened to the fact that it's interesting this is coming up because I just wrote a long essay about it for another program. You know, the industrial age co-opted the belief that everyone was creative and everybody, I mean, they weren't going around saying before the industrial age, oh, we're all so creative, it wasn't that. But there was this inherent acceptance that human beings were creative. And of course, sometimes various talents were cultivated, but it was only the specialization that came along after the Industrial Revolution that eventually led to specialization within the arts and crafts as well. And then I personally feel that the art world co-opted the right to creativity and set themselves, because human beings love to create boundaries. They love to create divisions. They love to set up situations where some people are losers and some people are winners. Some people are better than others. And so that discussion of art versus craft is rooted, I think, in that history. And I think the good news is that it seems to be moving away from it, partly because so many younger artists of all genders and colors have embraced craft materials and used them in such a way that we can no longer tease art and craft apart. You know, there's a beautiful saying that I'm only going to paraphrase because I don't remember it exactly, but it's something like, when we come to really know each other, there'll be no more reason for words, and we will live peacefully in silence. And what I'm really hoping is that this ongoing discussion of what is art and what is craft will eventually just end, because it won't be relevant anymore. And we will have circled back to a place which is that is it T.S. Eliot, you know, it's circling back and knowing it for the first time. We'll circle back to the place where it no longer matters which it is, and all is equally fine and good. And if somebody was arguing with you about that, I would find some gentle way to say, you know, I just think there's so much more to it than that. And my wish for you is that you could explore this on a deeper level, so that you might realize that what it really comes down to is the experience the maker's having more than it is the object itself. And if anybody figures out how to put that in an elevator speech, send it to me so I can use it. It's unrealistic to convince anybody in just a short conversation.
Here's another comment. The pandemic made me reevaluate my priorities. I decided to only do those things that gave me joy. I found new weaving techniques, ones I'd never tried, available in weave-alongs and online classes. Took the plunge and found I loved it. For a lot of us, the extra time that we've had and sort of, yeah, giving ourselves permission to, oh, here's a class or try something. It's been fascinating that instead of doing less, some of us have found ourselves doing more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we thought we weren't going to like Zoom, and of course you can burn out on Zoom. We all can. But on the other hand, as long as we keep it engaged, it's actually a good thing.
More of a comment. As a professor in a non-artistic field, I often have people taking me less seriously because they tell students learning FDA law can be fun. I love your linking of play and research, and we'll use this to help people understand.
Great. I love that. Thank you.
That's a good one. Yeah, I mean, FDA law can be fun, sure. Bethany's saying, Jane has been my guide for years and years. Just listening to her wise and beautiful softness in times of doubt and insecurity, and her many classes attended by myself and close friends at SAQA conferences to just sit and chat have been a sanctuary.
Yeah, that's what we've created here, a sanctuary. I love that idea. Thank you, Bethany.
Okay, I'm hearing you. This past year, I felt like I was working quite in a frenzy and quite in a vacuum. The amazing group of creative friends I've surrounded myself with helped pull me out of myself and into a better place. Fantastic talk.
Thank you.
Oh, here's someone with a recommendation. I recommend Peter Block's book on community, which is not specifically about creativity, but is about community.
That's a good suggestion. I would never have thought of that.
Oh, the fourth thing. So materials, passion. What is the third?
Oh, the stool analogy. One leg is your process, one leg is your materials, and the other leg is your passion or what you care about.
Okay, I'm writing that one down. Oh, here's a good suggestion. I find sometimes just putting the piece away and not looking at it can give you a new vision when you bring it out again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that can go both ways. I was one time, quite a while ago, long time ago now, I went into a thrift store and there was a piece of mine hanging on the wall and it had tea stains all over it. And part of me was a little shocked and part of me was thought it was pretty funny. And part of me thought, oh my God, did I make that? So sometimes when we see work after the fact, one of the best responses we can have is, well, damn, I'm sure glad I didn't put any more energy into finishing that ugly thing. It can happen.
Okay, here's a comment. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed your keynote and your color class. Both have given me so much to think about.
Great. That's great.
Right. Okay, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. Rumi.
Yeah, I love that one. That's a great one. See, this is where I just think that poetry in particular is so, it offers such a wealth of beautiful ideas. And if you're looking for inspiration, I highly suggest turning to poets and reading poems and trying to pay attention to the visuals that come up, because I find it a really inspiring way to work myself.
Right, we have about 3 more minutes because I've been finding that the live streams have been cutting us off at about 1 minute short. So I have 2 more comments here. You're describing the realization of truth of abundance versus the illusion of scarcity.
Mhm. Well said, exactly.
Especially in these days. Oh, and here's another recommendation, Twyla Tharp's book, Thy Creative Habit.
That's a great one too.
Those are all the questions that we have. I am just so grateful for this talk and for your sharing insights and encouragement with us.
Well, Mark, if I had the opportunity to stand next to you on the stage live, I would be asking everyone to stand up and clap for you right now.
Thank you. People have heard me say it before, this has been a labor of love, and we have put a lot into it and just are so thrilled at how much everybody is embracing, enjoying, and getting something positive from this. If it's helping to jumpstart people's creativity or engagement with community, or even just trying something different and saying, okay, Zoom meetings aren't that bad, then we're delighted to have been able to provide this opportunity for everyone.
Absolutely. It's filling up the well. That's a good thing. Well, I don't want to be unceremoniously cut off either, so I will thank you all again for welcoming me here today and say that it was a privilege to think about these ideas and to put this talk together for you, and I've thoroughly